All right, guys, we're going to take our last section of notes here on section 4 of chapter 4. You should write these down. That way you'll have them. When we come back to school next week, Tuesday, we'll review. I'm hoping that I'm able to be there. And then Wednesday, we'll take our chapter 4 test. Okay. And don't forget about your photo essays. Those will be due next week as well when we come back to school. But section 4 here, we're talking about rivalry in North America. And if you've read the section or you've done your assignment yet, you know that the rivalry that this is talking about is not between the colonies and the British. Okay, this is going to be a rivalry between the French and the British in the 1700s. Okay, both England and France are kind of fighting for control of North America. The British have the 13 colonies that they've established. The French are enjoying a good fur trade with the Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. That they're being is very prosperous for them, and the English see that and they want a part of that. They're basically saying that they have claims to those lands. And this is going to lead to conflict between the two countries. I said the resources in the Ohio River Valley made it good for the fur trade. The Native Americans were more willing to trade with the French. If you remember from previous chapter, the French were less likely to take their lands and push them off their lands. They befriended the Native Americans. They traded with them. They converted them to Roman Catholicism. And so the French had quite a few allies when it came to Native Americans. Not many of the Native American groups allied themselves with the British. To protect their claims in the Ohio River Valley, both groups are going to start to build forts in the region, from Lake Ontario down to the Ohio River Valley or the Ohio River. The French will start building forts. The British will start building forts to try and protect their claims in that area. Before a British fort is even completed, the French and their Native American allies are going to attack a British fort. They will take it over. They will finish it themselves, and they will call it Fort Duquesne. That's not Fort Duquesne. It's pronounced Duquesne, in case you were wondering how that was pronounced. But it was originally was going to be a British fort. It wasn't finished. The French will come in and take it over and name it Fort Duquesne. Well, in kind of retaliation for that, the Virginia governor is going to ask the Virginia militia to go and attempt to expel the French from that region. They want to kick them out, want to get them out of that region. So he asks the Virginia militia, take your men, go and expel the French. Well, the leader of that militia is a man who you have heard of before, and one that we will talk about a whole lot more. George Washington is the leader of the Virginia militia at this point in time. So he's technically fighting for the British against the French in this conflict between these two countries. He's going to take his army. He's going to take the militia. They're going to be defeated near Great Meadows, and again they'll build a makeshift fort called Fort Necessity. The French and Native Americans will then attack Fort Necessity, where they will force Washington and his men to surrender, and they will take them prisoner. Several months later, they will let them go and let them head back to Virginia. But it was a defeat for Washington and the militia there at Fort Necessity in Great Meadows. And this is an early picture of George Washington, not like the one on the dollar bill like we know today that we see all the time. as conflict and war starts, both sides are going to start to seek help from the different Native American groups. We said that this was a huge advantage for the French because they already had a bunch of allies in the Native American groups that were in their region. Not many groups are gonna side on the side of the British, but they're going to attempt to seek help from some of those groups. The British government basically tells the colonies, hey, we want you to meet and we want you to negotiate an alliance with the Iroquois Confederacy, a group that we've talked about before. If you remember the Iroquois Confederacy or the Iroquois League, the Mohawk, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, the Seneca. Well, there's actually a sixth group, which is part of that Iroquois Confederacy or Iroquois League now. It's called the Tuscarora. Okay, so there's actually 6 tribes that are a part of this Iroquois League that they're going to try to ally themselves with. So in June of 1754, they'll meet at what becomes known as the Albany Conference in Albany, New York. They meet with the Iroquois leaders to try and come up with some sort of an alliance so that the Iroquois will fight with the British against the French. In this meeting, the Iroquois basically tell the British, we're not going to become your allies. However, we're not going to join the French. We're going to remain neutral, which means we're not fighting for either side. We're not going to get involved at all. So we're not fighting with you, but we're not fighting against you too. And so that's what came out of that meeting. But at the same time, at this meeting, there were delegates from 7 of the colonies. And one of the things that they talked about at this meeting was the idea of unifying all the colonies together to kind of work together against a greater cause. This plan that is brought up was the work of Benjamin Franklin. It's called the Albany Plan of Union. And he's going to propose that the colonies unite to form some sort of a federal government or a central government amongst all the colonies so that they can work together if need be. Well, in order to do that, he told them, yes, we want a central or a federal government. However, if we do that, all the colonies are going to have to give up some of their powers. None of the colonies were willing to do that. They liked the idea of coming together, but they didn't want to give up any powers to do it. And so they leave this meeting not forming this federal government that he decided to come up with. Just a picture of the 6 Iroquois nations there in present day, or all in present day New York. Okay, and a political cartoon that Benjamin Franklin drew, which was thought to be one of the first political cartoons ever. But he drew this snake, and it has they're different pieces, and each piece represents a colony. The head piece here was the all the New England colonies. Okay, as one group. But there was an old wives' tale that said if you take a snake that's been killed and cut him up into pieces and put the ends close together, it will come back together and come back to life and be stronger than it was before. So that was the idea that he put into this cartoon. All the different colonies are the different pieces. Let's put them end to end. We'll join together. If not, if we don't join together, then we're going to die. So that was the cartoon that he put out from this meeting. The fighting is going to escalate into what we know as the French and Indian War. That's what it was called in the Americas. The war between the British and the French was actually called the 7 Years' War, but the fighting in America was known as the French and Indian War. So don't get those mixed up. I mean, it is the same thing, but it was called something different while it was here in the colonies. Early on, the French are going to enjoy some success with their Native American allies. They'll take several British forts until a man named William Pitt becomes the prime minister of Britain. He was a very, very good general, war leader. And so when he takes over, he says, I'm sending 10,000 soldiers to the Americas to try to end this. And so that's what he does. They're going to take several key forts in the Ohio River Valley. Eventually, they'll take Fort Duquesne that we talked about just a second ago. And they'll kind of take over that whole region. They'll eventually go into Canada. They will seize the city of Quebec, which was the capital of New France. And by seizing Quebec, they are able to take control of New France. Quebec set up on a hill. A lot of people said it was not able to be attacked. Well, the British found a small trail on the side of a cliff that they could go up, and they ended up attacking Quebec, and they were successful in overtaking Quebec and taking control of New France. That's a picture of William Pitt there. But eventually, the French will surrender. And anytime you have a war, you're going to have a treaty that ends a war. And the Treaty of Paris was the treaty that ended the war in 1763. Okay, we're going to talk about the stipulations and the things that came out of the Treaty of Paris. Okay, one, France gave Canada and all of its lands east of the Mississippi River to Britain. So Canada, everything from the Mississippi River east to around the Appalachian Mountains that they laid claim to, especially the Ohio River Valley, they gave all that to Britain. Because when you lose, you got to give something up. Britain is also going to receive Florida from Spain, because Spain had been helping the French in the French and Indian War. And so when the French surrendered, the Spanish gave up Florida, and they gave that to Britain. However, Spain is going to get something from the French, and that's going to be all the lands west of the Mississippi River, or what we know as Louisiana. Okay, so after the French and Indian War, the French basically have no lands in the present-day United States or Canada anymore. Once they lost, they gave up all those lands. They will actually get Louisiana back a little bit later, but we'll talk about that in another chapter. With the defeat of the French, the Native Americans knew that the outlook was not going to be good for them. Okay, the British had been accustomed to taking Native American lands, not paying for it, pushing them off their lands, and so they knew that with the French losing, this was going to be a big deal. And so an Ottawa chief named Pontiac decided he was going to take it into his own hands, and he starts to attack British forts. He starts to attack settlers and colonists and burn down their homes and their towns, and trying to push them further off their lands and push them back towards the coast. Okay, because it got so bad, the British government is going to pass what was called the Proclamation of 1763. And what this said, it basically told all of the colonists that there are to be no settlers west of the Appalachian Mountains without permission. So basically, it moved, if there were people west of the Appalachian Mountains, they were forced to leave and move back east, and you could not move west of the Appalachians anymore. It was basically moving all the people back closer to the coast so that the British government could kind of have them in one spot and control them a lot easier. Okay, this is just going to be one of the first of many things to come that will lead us into a revolution with the British. Okay, all right, so there's your notes on section 4. Make sure you get those written down and have them with you when we come back to class on Tuesday.